The room was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the cameras. A congressional hearing, routine on the surface, but under the fluorescent lights, something heavier lingered. An air of arrogance. JD Vance leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a practiced smirk. He believed the stage was his, that his words would echo unchallenged, that his version of truth would be the only one remembered. But across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, unflinching, calm. Her eyes locked onto him with the kind of gaze that stripped away pretense. She didn't need theatrics, her silence carried more weight than his entire performance. Vance shifted, still wearing that smirk, as if daring her to speak. And then she leaned forward just slightly, a subtle move that shifted the entire energy of the room. Her voice, low but sharp, cut through the silence like glass. "Senator, the problem isn't what you're saying, it's what you're hiding." The smirk froze. For the first time, the mask cracked. The hearing room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Because this wasn't just a clash of words. It was the moment a truth, long buried, was about to surface. What made this single exchange so dangerous, so electric, was not just the clash of personalities. It was what hung in the balance. Behind JD Vance's polished smile lay a carefully constructed image, the reformed outsider, the everyman-turned-senator who claimed to speak for forgotten America. But behind that story lived contradictions, deals, and alliances that few dared to drag into daylight. If those cracks were exposed, the myth would shatter, and with it a narrative his allies had spent years protecting. That's why the room felt heavier with every passing second. This was no ordinary political squabble. It was a collision of values: transparency against concealment, service against self-interest, truth against the machinery of deception. Crockett wasn't just challenging a man, she was daring to unravel a story that powerful forces wanted sealed shut, and the timing made it even sharper. At a moment when Americans were asking whether integrity still had a place in politics, here was a freshman congresswoman ready to confront a senator who had built a career on calculated reinvention. The staffers lining the back wall knew it. Journalists scribbling notes could feel it. Even viewers at home, watching through glowing screens, felt that prickle of anticipation. This wasn't theater, it was history tipping on its axis. Because the next words out of Jasmine Crockett's mouth weren't simply rebuttal, they were revelation. And once she spoke them, the room, and the country, would never see JD Vance in quite the same way again. JD Vance sold America a story. A boy from the hills of Ohio, raised amid struggle, who clawed his way through the chaos of poverty and addiction to graduate from Yale Law. His memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, was held up as gospel, a window into the forgotten corners of working-class America. The media crowned him the voice of Appalachia, a truth-teller who could explain despair to the powerful. For a time, he was cast as the underdog who beat the odds. But the man who wrote about broken communities and the corrosive grip of hopelessness did not stay that man. When opportunity knocked, Vance reinvented himself first as a venture capitalist, then as a MAGA loyalist. The same figure who once criticized Trump as an idiot transformed into one of his loudest defenders. That pivot was not born of conviction, it was born of ambition. And with the shift came arrogance. He spoke less like the boy from Middletown and more like a man intoxicated by power policy. Positions hardened into culture war broadsides. Compassion for struggling families blurred into rhetoric about real Americans versus the rest. His words carried undertones that dismissed immigrants, mocked diversity, and leaned into resentment as a political weapon. Behind the smirk was a pattern: say what sells, hide what contradicts. He could talk about poverty, but block measures that would lift families out of it. He could speak of dignity but cheer policies that stripped communities of it. To the cameras, he was the son of Appalachia who understood pain behind closed doors. He was another politician who knew how to exploit it. And that is what Jasmine Crockett saw. Not the best-selling author, not the senator with a rags-to-riches tale, but the man who built a mask, wore it proudly, and prayed no one would dare pull it away. She was about to. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive at this hearing by accident. Her path had been carved through relentless effort, through nights spent balancing law books and bills, through the quiet courage of a young woman determined to make her community heard. She was born into a world where the odds were stacked against her, where systemic injustice whispered that ambition had limits, and where standing up often carried risk. And yet, she chose to rise. Her early years in law were defined not by accolades, but by service. She took cases others ignored, defending families caught in cycles of inequality, immigrants navigating hostile systems, and communities facing barriers they didn't choose. She became a voice for those the world often silenced, learning early that advocacy was not a matter of convenience, but of principle. With every courtroom victory and every battle lost, Crockett honed a resilience few could match. She learned how to speak truth to power without fear, how to remain composed when others sought to intimidate, and how to make integrity louder than applause. Her activism extended beyond legal briefs. She fought for policies that expanded opportunity, challenged structures that perpetuated injustice, and cultivated a reputation as someone unafraid to hold powerful figures accountable. Her peers saw her as fierce yet dignified, a leader whose courage inspired collective action, and as she moved from law to public service, Crockett carried those lessons into the halls of government, understanding that the same persistence that won cases could confront political deception. Every challenge had prepared her for this moment, the moment she would sit across from a man whose entire public image was constructed, whose contradictions were carefully hidden. She had stared down bullies, bureaucracies, and systemic bias before she had navigated hostile rooms where her presence alone was a provocation, and now, in the glare of cameras and the tension of history watching, she was ready to channel all of it into a single, decisive act of truth-telling. Crockett's story was one of relentless determination, of empathy forged in struggle, and of a courage that refused to bend under pressure. Her journey was not just personal. It was emblematic of every underrepresented voice that demanded to be heard. And as she prepared to confront JD Vance, the room would soon realize that the woman before them carried not only the weight of facts, but the unstoppable force of lived experience and unwavering conviction. This was her moment, and every step of her journey had led here. The chamber hummed with tension, a current that seemed to tighten the air with each passing second. JD Vance's smirk had returned, sharper now, a mask of confidence meant to unnerve. He began speaking, voice smooth, calculated, laced with insinuations, attempting to frame the conversation on his terms. The audience leaned in, waiting to see if this veteran of media spin could dominate a freshman congresswoman. Crockett remained still, her hands folded lightly on the desk, her gaze unwavering. Every attempt by Vance to derail her, to bait her into a misstep, was met with measured calm. She refused to rise to his theatrics, letting his words hang in the charged silence like loose wires. The cameras captured it all, the subtle shift of her expression, the faint tightening of Vance's jaw, the crowd of aides and journalists straining to catch every syllable. Frustration crept into Vance's tone. He interrupted now, sharper, attacking her credibility, mocking her in ways meant to provoke. Yet Crockett did not flinch. Her voice, steady and precise, countered each claim, each implication, cutting through the narrative he had so carefully built. Insults escalated. Accusations bounced back and forth, the room electric with the clash of conviction against calculated pretense. Observers could feel it. This was no ordinary debate. Every glance, every pause carried weight. Social media notifications pinged as live feeds streamed the confrontation, hashtags forming mid-sentence. Audiences at home leaned closer, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. And then, just as Vance prepared what he thought would be a final, victorious jab, Crockett leaned forward, eyes blazing with a calm fury that silenced the chamber. The room held its collective breath. "What you've been trying to hide, Senator," she said, voice low but commanding, "is about to be seen by everyone." A shiver ran through the room. The cameras didn't blink. Vance froze, caught off guard. The air seemed to thicken. Everyone knew in that instant that the story was about to turn, and no one would leave this chamber unchanged. Crockett's eyes never wavered. She had measured her words, sharpened them in the quiet hours before the hearing, and now, with the weight of truth behind her, she struck. One point at a time, she dismantled Vance's carefully constructed arguments, each sentence precise, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. "You've spoken of accountability," she began, voice steady. But your record tells a different story. You've championed transparency in speeches, yet blocked measures that would hold corporations accountable for the very practices that harm the communities you claim to represent? The chamber murmured softly, whispers spreading like wildfire. Journalists leaned forward, fingers frozen over keyboards, sensing the significance of each phrase. Vance opened his mouth, attempting a retort, but Crockett anticipated him, sliding into her next strike seamlessly. You've built an image of the self-made man, rising from the hills against all odds, but you've leveraged privilege and political loyalty to shield yourself from scrutiny. That narrative of struggle, so compelling in your book, is selective. It omits the deals and alliances that contradict the values you claim to uphold. A ripple moved through the audience. Staffers exchanged glances. Some held their breath. Even Vance's smirk began to falter, a flicker of unease passing across his features. He gestured, tried to regain control, but every word he offered was intercepted by Crockett's calm, relentless logic. She paused, letting the weight of her next revelation sink in. "And let us not ignore the rhetoric aimed at communities you deem outsiders," she said, her tone low but unmistakable. "Words meant to divide, policies that marginalize, actions that betray the very people who trusted you to represent them." The room was electric. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Cameras captured every micro-expression, the tightening of Vance's jaw, the slight tremor in his hands, the sudden rigid posture that betrayed the cracks in his armor. Then she leaned forward, her gaze piercing, and delivered the line that would echo beyond the chamber walls. "Senator, the truth you spent years hiding is not yours to protect anymore. The country is watching, and the story ends here." A collective gasp filled the room. Journalists exchanged wide-eyed glances. Social media feeds erupted in real-time chaos. Vance, caught off guard, stared at her. The mask of control slipping completely. Crockett remained composed, the calm force in the eye of the storm, as the very narrative he had meticulously constructed began to unravel before everyone's eyes. It was not just a rebuttal. It was a takedown, a revelation. A mic drop moment that left the audience, the chamber, and the country with one undeniable truth. JD Vance's carefully hidden story was finally exposed, and no smirk, no charm, no revisionist history could put it back in the shadows. The moment Crockett's words landed, the world outside the chamber ignited. Notifications pinged relentlessly as viewers shared clips in real time on Twitter. Hashtags like #TruthExposed and #CrockettClapsBack began trending within minutes. Memes flooded feeds, some humorous, some scathing, all carrying the unmistakable weight of collective awe. Her calm dismantling of Vance became a cultural flashpoint, dissected by commentators, GF'd for instant reaction, and replayed endlessly across screens nationwide. Late-night comedians didn't hold back. Monologues opened with her line, her composure, her precision. Sketches portrayed the hearing room frozen in suspense, Vance's smirk cracking under Crockett's relentless truth. Every joke, every commentary, reinforced what millions were already sensing. This was a political moment that transcended party lines, a reminder that power could be challenged with dignity and courage. On cable news and digital outlets, pundits replayed the exchange, dissecting every sentence, every pause, every glance. Analysts debated the implications for Vance's credibility and future campaigns. Editors highlighted her methodical takedown, praising the way she combined preparation with moral authority. Across op-eds and talk shows, one theme dominated. A new standard of accountability had been demonstrated, live and unflinching. Meanwhile, social media audiences erupted with pride and admiration. Immigrant communities, young activists, and identity-driven voters saw in Crockett a reflection of resilience they recognized in themselves. Comment threads overflowed with declarations. "Finally, someone who speaks truth to power. This is the representation we've been waiting for. Crockett just changed the game." The digital applause echoed far beyond the hearing room. The ripple effect reached the halls of Congress. Allies whispered in corridors, opponents reconsidered strategies, and political operatives scrambled to recalibrate narratives. The spectacle had done more than reveal a hidden truth. It had altered the conversation, shifted expectations, and amplified voices that demanded transparency. In homes, offices, and cafes, the clip replayed over and over, a shared moment of collective revelation. Everyone who watched understood. This was not a simple debate, not a fleeting political skirmish. This was a turning point, a demonstration that courage, preparation, and integrity could break through calculated facades. And as the digital storm swirled, the world waited, breathless, to see what would happen next. As the echoes of the hearing faded, a larger truth began to settle. This moment was never just about JD Vance or one confrontation. It was about the kind of America we aspire to be, an America where power does not shield deception, where privilege cannot silence accountability, and where integrity carries the weight of change. Crockett had not merely won a debate, she had reminded the nation that courage, dignity, and truth are forces more powerful than charisma, spin, or carefully constructed narratives. In a country too often divided by rhetoric and fear, her calm, unyielding insistence on accountability offered a model for what leadership could look like. She demonstrated that standing firm against arrogance was not antagonistic, it was essential. And she showed that preparation, empathy, and lived experience could transform a moment of confrontation into a universal lesson, one that resonated far beyond partisan lines. For those watching, especially young leaders, immigrants, and underrepresented voices, the message was unmistakable. Your voice matters. Courage is contagious. Standing for what is right, even when the odds seem stacked against you, can create ripples that reshape entire conversations. Crockett's act was a testament to the idea that political systems are not immutable, that even the most entrenched narratives can be challenged, and that accountability is achievable when principles guide action. And so, the moral crystallized. Dignity triumphs over arrogance. Truth overcomes lies. Leadership is measured not by the ability to perform under lights, but by the willingness to speak when silence is easier, to act when complacency would be convenient. As the country digested the implications, one reality became clear. Voices like Jasmine Crockett's are not optional. They are necessary. They illuminate hidden truths, challenge falsehoods, and inspire a collective commitment to justice and integrity. The hearing room may have emptied, and the cameras may have been turned off, but the lesson endured. This was more than political theater. It was a blueprint for ethical leadership, a call to action for citizens and lawmakers alike, a reminder that when courage meets preparation, when empathy confronts deception, the outcome is not merely victory, it is transformation. And as the nation paused, reflecting on what had just unfolded, one thought lingered. The story of truth is never finished. It only grows stronger when people like Jasmine Crockett refuse to let lies stand unchallenged. Jasmine Crockett forced JD Vance to reveal the truth they tried to hide. Those words echo far beyond the walls of a congressional hearing. They mark a moment when courage met deception and refused to back down. What unfolded was more than a confrontation. It was a demonstration that integrity can pierce through pretense, that preparation and principle can overpower arrogance, and that voices grounded in truth have the power to reshape narratives. For every viewer watching at home, this is not just a story to witness. It is a call to action. Share this moment, discuss it with your communities, and let it remind you that accountability is not passive. It is active. Stand for truth in your own spheres, challenge falsehoods, and amplify voices that fight for dignity and justice. Subscribe to follow stories like this, where courage collides with power, and every act of accountability inspires the next engage, comment, and become part of a movement that refuses to let arrogance silence dignity. Because when people like Jasmine Crockett rise, when truth is spoken boldly, the ripple effects are unstoppable, and the world begins to change. Never forget, one voice, steadfast and fearless, can force the truth into the light, and every one of us has the power to do the same.